The disturbances at university campuses were at least in part related to a dissatisfaction among some students with their role in the university structure and their limited influence in government. The continued war in Vietnam, the Cambodian incursion, the shootings at Kent State and Jackson State universities, all these factors were fuel for the fires of discontent. The activities on campus forced most students to take a stand one way or the other, and the spectrum of views was broad.
If that's the way this administration forces us to go, then that's the way we'll go. But we don't want to go that way. But the violence, the violence is perpetuated not by us, but by the administration.
Which say legitimate questions have been raised. I don't doubt, but I know there's a strong feeling on the part, a sincere feeling, on the part of many of these demonstrators. And demonstration is a legitimate form of protest.
Not only are there not appropriate channels to discuss recruiting, but the channels aren't available to discuss grading systems, curriculum, number of issues. Recruiting is one of them.
See, I don't think a university is a democracy. It's more of a passive thing. Most of the students should be learning here. I think that the management of the university should be left to those more experienced and professional.
And the people that work here, that includes the non-academic employees, should be allowed to determine what happens on this campus.
Very few, in fact, even want an official role, even want any more. I think they want to see that there's a fair and just administration, just as we're concerned about the national government, the state government.
Really, the only way they have of becoming involved with the government is in the streets. They cannot vote. They certainly have no say as to whether or not the officials that were elected are going to end the war in Vietnam. These people should be given the right to vote so that they have an outlet for all their feelings.
I think that these kinds of moves will lessen the feeling or reduce the feeling on the part of students and youth that the only way to get a discussion or to have a discussion of national priorities, etc., and the role of the university in society and things like this, it will reduce their feeling that the only way to do this is to have some confrontation.
The Illinois General Assembly was, as a whole, noticeably disturbed by the violence on campuses. Some individual legislators sought to end the dissidents by imposing economic sanctions on the entire university system.
We can have a state university where students come presumably with the purpose of getting an education, and then under the false colors of free speech and free assembly, that they destroy property, they just incite riot. It just became a mob. And we don't think probably that it's within the power of the university, was within the power of the university to stop it. But I'm one who believes that there could have been things done in the past that would have put the fear of God in some of these people, and they wouldn't have done it.
Following the second major outbreak of disturbances this spring, the State General Assembly first ordered, then requested, a number of university administrators and students to appear before the legislature and to explain why protesters were permitted to interrupt university operations. The extraordinary session turned out to be far less a witch hunt than some had expected. The rhetoric was generally cool, as for the first time, the body of legislators met face-to-face with young people who were dissatisfied with the direction of the social and political systems. But the responses of university administrators were of primary interest to many.
The complexity arises from the fact that a relatively small number of people bent on changing an assembly into a mob cannot be successful without the support of the assembly they seek to control. In a student population of some 23,000 at Carbondale, there was enough latent or actual dissatisfaction to involve some 5,000 to 6,000 people in the group, which did turn into a mob on the night of May 12th. This dissatisfaction is not isolated to the Carbondale campus.
A small number of students, usually joined by a company of non-students, for admitted anti-social reasons, are prepared to take advantage of mass protest by inciting a mob reaction which often leads to destructive acts. At the University of Illinois, from the beginning of student incidents of the kind here described, the position of the Board of Trustees and of the administration, endorsed in large measure by students and faculty, has been to deal firmly with violence, disruption, and coercion. Occupation of buildings is not acceptable, and this was made clear, nor are discussions of so-called student demands conducted under coercive conditions.
The most salient point in understanding the recent unrest on campus and the growth of disorder on campuses in general is that we are experiencing a reaction among students against basic problems and inequities on campus and in society at large. Because this is the case, the solution to campus unrest lies not in repressive actions against students, faculty, and campus administrators. Rather, it lies in substantial movement towards solution of these basic problems.